Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, Anne, and Disembodied Hands, Quindy, and Justin, and John. For those who are very confused, I streamed on my channel on Saturday, not the previous Saturday, and I'm not sure what else there was craziness, but no, Turgeon, I did not stream the previous Saturday on my own channel. I only streamed this Saturday. I was in Monterey 2 weekends ago. Hello, everybody. Yes, David went to a birthday party, and so I just streamed. How is everyone? I'm a little bit laggy today, obviously. But there we are. We're going to do stuff today. I'm going to get my mask out. We're probably going to use the grinder, the nail grinder, to take off some of these mold lines today. And I've got my water, so yay, hydration. Restream did not show the stream pop up on... Oh, yeah. Did it? It didn't, huh? I know they talked about doing, like, streaming my stream, or putting my stream in the game store, but the game store is not, like, open yet, is it? So I am going to grind things today, so let us mask up. I know, you guys are all sick of masks. I am too. Oh, wrong way. There it is. So this is an RZ mask. It's an airbrush mask. If I'm going to do grindy things where resin dust will fly into the air, I want to have a good mask on. Cool, crows. So I like this mask a lot. It's not quite as weird and huge and cumbersome as some of the big masks, but it does have the filtration, so make sure it's a good fit. Make sure you've got your mask all nice and, you know, set up so it's nice and snug. And these are little nail grinders, so they're for doing fingernails. You can find them. There's a whole bunch of different generic ones that are out. I like to use the diamond bit. I've just learned that I like the finish that it gives. I also recently ordered a huge set of different bits for it, with even smaller and more interesting bits in different shapes, which I haven't quite gotten around to mess with, but I like this tapered one. It does quite a good job, so we're going to use it. But as I mentioned, you do wear a mask for this because resin dust is not something you ever want to breathe, ever. So we've got a control for speed and for forward and reverse. It really doesn't matter whether you forward or reverse. Uh-oh, am I not plugged in? Oh, I unplugged myself. There we go. It's a USB connection, so it plugs right into my little lamp here, which is very, very handy. There we go. All right, so what we've got here is we've got a big ugly mold line going down this side. And you could file this with traditional files for sure, and you could just green it in if you're really good with green stuff. But I think this grinder is just really convenient. Maybe it takes a little while, but not as long as a file would, a traditional file. You certainly could use sanding sticks. You certainly can use traditional files for this. You could use a knife to get a lot of this off first. Or you could get one of these handy dandy little machines for like 18 bucks. Maybe less if you just went to your local beauty supply store. And then what I try to do after I do a little bit is I get a stiff Taklon brush and I brush off the dust just to see what I might need to do. Now, if you want to, uh-oh, did I leave my knife in the other room? Curses! I left my knife in the other room. 1 second while I fetch my knife. I was doing prep work yesterday also. Hey, D. Clearman, wow, 31 months ahead of everyone. Okay. Yeah, I left my knife in there. So what I often will do, as I try to read the chat with my glasses on and my mask on, this is just not working. That cat should not complain about noodles. Noodles are tasty. I don't get to have them very often. All right, so if you wanted to cut down on the amount of work you have to do, and yes, I know that the hat is going over this part, so we didn't really need to worry about this part, but if you are doing the kerchief and leaving the hat off, you do have to worry about this part. So come at the mold line from the other side of it, so the side that's sticking out. And you should be able to get a lot with the knife. Try to, of course, always one, cut away from yourself if you can. Two, see if you can get a lot of this stuff off just with your knife before you even pull the grinder out. It will actually cut a lot of time down. If I can't get into a good position to slice from the side of the mold, the shelf, then I'll try to shave it from the other side. It's just not quite as effective. And when you've got an edge like this, you absolutely can just like resculpt it with your knife tip to bring it flush. But when you get down to stuff like the hair, that's when the grinder is your friend. So, and I've already used a knife to take this one down, as you can see. It's still there, so I'll still be using this. Yeah, Cranston, me too. So the nice thing about this is that you can get into these recessed areas, and that means you might not have to use green stuff to get rid of this mold line. So be gentle with it. Try not to take out any other detail, but you should be able to grind down. And when you feel that you don't feel any resistance when you're pushing it against where there used to be a mold line, you probably have taken it all off. Ta-da! Look, it's beautiful and smooth, and it didn't take us more than a few seconds. So you can be very light with this. You can have a lot of finesse with these tools, actually. It will tend to want to grab onto the resin when you first, if you have it going at a certain speed. So be conscious of that and be real delicate with the touch going in. But you can actually be quite finesseful with this, especially on bigger models like this. And again, I tend to just like take a little brush off the bits to just get a better look at what I'm doing. I'm going to have to turn the model around to get a better angle on this part, just like if I was working with files. Oh. See how that goes. Let's see here. Okay, so we've got a little bit of an edge left here. Let's get a little closer. You can also, every once in a while, just like with the regular diamond file, I stop my tool and take a little bit of cloth and just kind of clean off the bit to get that resin dust out of it. So that's nice and sharp. Because, you know, just like with regular files, resin will clog the tip a bit and reduce how effective your grinder is working. And this is such gentle action that if it does kind of skip a little bit, it's not going to like make a big gouge in your resin, even though resin is itself very soft. I mean, this is made for working next to human skin, and that's the great thing about these grinders is if you press too hard, they have an auto stop. And they're just not like hardcore enough to really make a big divot in your miniature if you just have a little bit of a glance where it skips. And again, you could be using a file with this. It would just take a little bit longer. You should still wear a mask if you're filing. You never want to breathe resin dust. It's not good for you. So it may happen as you take this down that you might bring out like a little a pit might appear or something else, some other flaw underneath the resin. And then you'd need to fill that with green stuff most likely. Let's do a file, a traditional file, since more people will have access to that. But I like to showcase this tool because it does make cleanup very easy. Get this dust off of here. Oh, it's brilliant on metal, Kuroniko. I used it to clean up that ogre that we're working on. And it is brilliant. Actually, I think it's better on metal than on resin, but it is good on resin as well. Diamond files. All right. There are a bunch of different shapes of diamond file, of course. For every surface you might want to hit. But yeah, if you guys are on my Patreon, I think I did a video on this. It's my new favorite tool, I think is what it's called. I did it a few months ago when I first got it. I tried it on all the bones materials, and I tried it on resin and metal. And I cover all that in the video to show the results. So essentially, I try it out on video. Now, diamond files, because you don't have that high speed element, it's just going to take you a lot longer to do what we were doing with that grinder. You'll still get the results, although it might be a little harder for you to get it smooth because you can't just burnish it. It's a little harder. There are times I will bring my knife in if I feel like I can get faster results. Or if like the edge of a strand of hair has gotten really sharp and I want to blunt it down. Because a lot of times, especially with 3D sculpts, the edges on like clumps of hair will be really sharp. And that keeps you from like painting strands sometimes. It makes it harder. So often I will take my knife and kind of blunt some of these strands to make them easier to paint. And on the bottom here, I start, if you want to make everything go a little faster, start with your knife and then kind of smooth things out with your files. So take down the majority of the edge with the knife Then bring a file in of the appropriate shape to try to bring that down. Now this is a little bit concave. There's a little bit of a dip here where the resin goes into fold. So that we may need grinder for. Or normally it's grinder or green stuff. It's one or the other. But out here on the side, this is pretty flush. It's more convex, and so it's easier to get it smoother. This is a pretty smooth diamond file. It's more for finishing work. So let me see if I have a rougher one. I think these are a little rougher. I have a couple of file sets. And you can usually tell how big the grain is. If you see it's more sparkly, that's a bigger grain. Dremels are problematic. Be aware, crows. This is not a Dremel. This is a mini Dremel. Aaron Lovejoy turned me on to these, a miniature monthly. He used to use a Dremel, but it's very difficult to use a Dremel because the torque is just so high. The great thing about these crows is they're much lower speed and they're much gentler, and they have the auto stop if you press too hard. So you're not going to hurt yourself and you're not going to hurt your model. I would, just based on what Aaron told me, I would not recommend using a regular Dremel. They're too high powered. They're not meant for fine work like this. Aaron had a lot of trouble with it. And he's an expert. So if he had a lot of trouble using a Dremel without hurting the model, a new person is going to have a harder learning curve. These things are a lot more cheap. For one thing, you can like get them, between 10 and 18 bucks, depending on where you go, if you can go local or if you can order on Amazon. And they're made for fine work. They're made for like doing your fingernails. So they really are ideal. Yeah, this is a rougher file. So a rougher file is going to take off more material with less pressure, which means it's going to go faster at first, but it may leave a little bit of scratchiness behind that you may need to address. Luckily, you can address that by bringing in a finer file and kind of burnishing over the top once you have a flush surface. But you can see that this is making a flush surface a lot faster than that other file. Yeah, these have a speed control, exactly. Yeah, if I would have said, if a Dremel was the ideal tool, I would have said a Dremel, but a Dremel is not the ideal tool. Too much power, essentially. I mean, Aaron was using one, but it was just not awesome. It was Liz who actually came up with it. Like, he was using a Dremel and he was cussing about how difficult it was and how it wasn't a great fit for the job. And he's like, I need like a miniature Dremel. And Liz came up with her nail drill and went like this. This is a seam. This is not a seam. This is a seam. Now, obviously before you prime this, you would want to get all this grit off of it. So go over it. May want to wash it. Never hurts with resin. We got another mold line over on this side. See it? It's a lot less, and it doesn't really continue up here, so we're pretty okay. We might want to do a little bit of grinding there. I'm going to try to see if I can take that with a knife, although it's a little bit in a depression there, so it may not be good. Yeah, there we go. $9.99 at Harbor Freight. I thought they were about 10 bucks if it's cheap. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not a tight fit, it's a loose fit. Yeah, D. Clerman has a good point of information. Yeah, this is in a little bit of a concave area, which is always harder, and that's what I feel like this grinder is really good at. I mean, regular files are pretty good at it too. But sometimes with the file, you can't get the right angle. Like I can't get, because of the base here, I can't get the right angle. Whereas if I grab my tool, because I can use the tip, I can easily angle it in there and to get all of that mold line. So you guys see how useful this is. Like, any day now, I expect a miniatures company to, like, figure out how to source these suckers and brand one as an actual miniatures tool. But yeah, I love the versatility of this because I can get this, because it spins itself and I don't have to have the right angle to apply pressure, I can get this into small areas that otherwise it would be very hard. I would have to end up using green stuff because I wouldn't be able to get a file in there. And you can just use such a nice, delicate touch with this. I do love it. It's so precision. Oh, you don't have to buy a branded one. I mean, there is all sorts of that, isn't there? Like Gale Force 9 rebranding Woodland Scenics, you know, stuff like that. There's all sorts of miniatures and model companies that are rebranding cheap things that you could find generically with like for like rebranding them for the miniatures market. But when they do that, it sometimes makes it easier to find them, right? Because then a game store might carry it. Just looking around, seeing where else. Like the recessed area in here, there's a tiny mold line. A lot of people will be tempted to just like just ignore that, but with this tool, I can get in there and actually wipe that out really easily. For things like way up under the arm in the armpit, I don't feel like I need to get really precise. Just need to wipe out the mold line. And sometimes the surface will look like it has a bit of scratchiness on it, which you can attack with sanding sticks. Oh, it's just a nail grinder. Just a nail grinder in our... They're little, like, fingernail tools. They normally come in a little set with tools like this. And these are big sanding rings that go on the chuck. And there's also finer rings that you can get, and this is a finer one. This got a bunch of different shapes. I haven't tried some of these polishing. I just got a big super awesome set. I haven't tried some of these cool polishing bits. But yeah, it's just really, for certain things I like it. Sometimes sometimes I still revert to normal files. But yeah, they're super cheap. You can get them, well, I forget, Big Apple just said you can get them for like $9.99 at Harbor Freight stores. I ordered mine on Amazon for like $18 with a bunch of extra bits. So I'm going to go to the diamond file down here because on this rounded surface, the diamond file is just fine. And again, I'm using a coarser diamond file for the start. And if I notice too much texture, I can just bring in a finer diamond file. Just like with sandpaper. You just start with the coarse grit and you go down to the fine grit. So it's all for me about, do I have enough room to effectively file? Like, what's the best? It's always going to be a what's the best tool for the job. Like, I'm not throwing out my files because I still find that there are areas. Like, I like the file better on this rounded surface because I feel like I have... Like, I feel like I might divot it a little bit with the electronic tool, but the power tool, but here I can manually do it and be a little bit more controlled. But this is like a different type of surface than some of this. But yes, it's all Aaron Lovejoy's fault. He's the one who told me about it. Way up near the model, I think I'm going to bring a knife in. There's a little rough rough edge there. It's hard to get a file in, but a knife edge can go in there. And because it's right up under the model, it's going to be painted black anyway, probably. So I might use a little bit of green stuff, but... And then here, I'm just going to use a little bit of a knife. So I very much, when I'm prepping, switch back and forth between knife, files, and rotary tool and green stuff. And if there's a nice flat edge like this, I'm just going to use my knife to take off that little bit because it's really nice and flat. The knife works just fine. On a flat surface, I feel like a knife is the best tool because anything else is probably going to create a little bit of a rounded divot when you file it. But because the knife edge is flat, if you can get it right up flat against that edge, you can take that down real quick. Again, minimum prep on the bottom of the model. I don't want to have a big mold line, but it doesn't have to be perfect. The bottom of the model is always painted black in a bust, usually black or really dark, to show that that's where the art cuts off. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to grab my my finer diamond files and just hit the edge of that area to take down texture and blend it in. So all this stuff that we're doing right now, you could also have done with green, but green would have been a bit more of a pain, and then you would have had to deal with waiting for the cure. Whereas you can do this with files. So there are definitely things that you can do with either. And the difference is just, you know, how comfortable are you with those techniques. Just taking a real critical eye, kind of looking. I do see a little bit of a mold line here on the hair. That's easy to shave off though. Yeah, I usually use this time when I'm prepping the model to think about colors a lot. To kind of imagine the model in various colors. Usually I'll think about hair color first. I usually go in, like, the first decision I make is what the skin tone is going to be, i.e. will it be, I don't even pick a specific, but I'm like, is this going to be a light skin tone or dark skin tone? Once I have that, then I think about hair color. And I'm going to base everything else generally off of those choices, unless I have a very strong, like, urge to paint her, like, her jacket a specific color. Like, if I came into this going, oh, it's got to be crimson, then I'm going to work my hair color and skin color off of that choice instead of the other way around. But this cleaning time is when I make those decisions. I think I've got everything. Maybe I could do a little bit more there. Since this part will probably be showing through under the hat. I'll take a bit of it out. You can take out some of these divots with the knife if you have enough room. See how it grabs a little bit, but not too bad. And I'm really just using it to polish this mold line out, so if it slips a little bit down here, it's not going to matter. One last kind of pass here to see. And then this one, because it was a little bit recessed, was a little bit annoying to try to get at with the file or the knife. It doesn't have like specific settings, it's just a sliding. I think I've got it in the middle. I've got it around in the middle war shadow. Like it's just a little speed control that goes one way and the other way. And I'm pretty sure I've got it right down in the middle. It's usually what I aim for, and then if I have to change it, I have to change it, but... Alright, let's brush this sucker off. Then we are probably going to do... I mean, as long as it's working the way you want it to work, you're good. We're going to get all this brushed off, and then we're going to take off our mask and start some green work. Just want to get all this little grit off of here. There we go. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, now we need to kind of get a list in our head. We did already, I'll remember how we did our green stuff last time. We had kind of a list that we followed to make sure we remembered to fill every bit in. So here we have an eyebrow divot. We have a little bubble there. See it? Right there. So that'll be the most delicate work we have to do today. Everything else here, that's not actually a divot. Looks like anything that's really, really fine, the primer's probably going to be fine to fill in, or you can even use some sealer or brush on primer to fill it in. I did miss a little bit here. There. Just gonna go over kind of looking at it with my knife and everything else to kind of get an idea if I've missed anything. Anything I missed at this point, I'm probably gonna just tackle with green, unless I can do an easy knife job on it. Here we have a strand of hair that's a little bit rough, so I'll come in with the knife. So we have a pit in the hair here as well. Now you can spend some time and just try to fill these guys in, like little tiny pits, like that little nick up here and this one. You might be able to fill it in just with primer or with sealer. Personally, I think our primer is a much better filler than our sealer is because it just does that. I always tell people to thin the primer on purpose because it's like, just unmask ourselves here. Thin the primer because it does actually glob up detail if you leave it too thick. So I'm going to shake the primer really, really well. Like primer, out of all the things in Master Series Paint, 9108 needs to be shaken like a demon. Like you need to hear that. You need to be able to hear that agitator. Or at least feel like you've given it a really good shake if it has been sitting around for a while. And this has been sitting around for about a month. So once I think I've got it in a good condition, when I squeeze it out, when you squeeze it out, it should be thick. Like you should be able to see that bead standing up. It should not be fluid and thin. If it's fluid and thin, you need to shake it more. I'm just going to put a little bit on the cap because I don't really need a lot for this. I'm going to grab a brush that's able to apply stuff pretty finely. Do I have a synthetic? Let me see if I've got a smaller synthetic, but I usually don't, so I may need to do an old brush. Yeah, let's use an older brush that still has a good tip on it. Primers contain chemicals that etch the surface and give the primer something to claw into, essentially. That's why primers stick better than paint does. But because of that, I've always felt like brushes probably don't need those extra chemicals abrading and drying out their hairs. So I try to use an old brush or a synthetic brush when I'm using primers. So I'm going to get a dab of that just right on my brush. I'm going to dab it into that little socket. Try to get it into it and not just on the top. And I'm going to fill in this guy. This one's a little bit bigger, so we'll see how it goes. So once I've got that laid down, and I'm just dabbed it, I'm going to get some, I'm going to rinse out my brush. I'm going to keep a little moisture in my brush. I'm just going to squeeze out. And then I'm going to use that moisture to kind of feather the edge here and blend it in to the surrounding area if I can. Because primer, I mean, we didn't thin it at all, so it's going to leave a blob if you don't thin it down and blend it in. So we'll see how that does. I may put just a little bit more over the top. And you can thin it a little bit if you want. If you want to make sure that it's a very, very smooth blend, you can thin it a little bit. I put a little bit of water on my brush, and now I'm going to go over the top. Thin your primer a little bit as you apply it. This is going to dry super fast because it's a very small area. Oh, I still see that hole. Let's get more primer down in that. That was useful. So yeah, because of the chemicals in primers, I tend to use an old brush or a synthetic brush. I don't want the chemicals to dry out the hairs in my sables. Used to do the same thing if you're using traditional inks that were done in lacquers. Even though those were actually water soluble, the fact that it was a lacquer base meant that it was chemically a bit different and harsher. And I always found that my sables would just like dry out, like the hairs would get brittle if I used that for inking a lot when I used to use inks on metallics. And so that kind of just got me into the habit of, if I'm working with a different type of fluid that definitely has a different chemical composition that's meant to do something abrasive, or meant to have like a harsh chemical like composition, I will definitely use a different brush with that. Yep, yeah, there's various putties and stuff. You can do Abe's epoxy sculpt. You can do the fine milliputs. Those are great because you can thin them with water. Maybe the Vallejo's the same way. But our primer, our primer is talented this way because it can fill in detail. You can actually play to that and use it this way. A lot of people use sealers, right? They use matte sealer or gloss sealers do the same thing. But I'm like, well, I'm going to prime the surface anyway, so using primer kind of seems like a no-brainer. So I'm going to do another coat here. And every time I go over the top of this, I'm going to get a feel for, did I actually fill it in? And on this one, I think it worked really well, actually. And I'm getting the feeling that I can still see a slight divot. This was a very small hole, so it was very easy to fix. This one, I can still see a tiny divot in the surface if I tilt it in the light, right there. So I know that I'm probably gonna need one more coat there, but still, it hasn't taken me long to do this. It certainly hasn't been a pain in the butt like green stuff. So what we're gonna try to do this on the eyebrow. Because why not? We're experimenting, right? Oh, there's another hole over here. But I managed to take that hole down a little bit. Now this one over here, which is, big. This one you could either choose to suggest it's just a ratty edge on the bandana, or you could fill it in, but I'd probably use putty if I did that. So again, every tool, and she does have some notches in her clothing down here. So I think putting a notch up there, and there is a notch over here as well. So it wouldn't, it would actually, this is one of the few cases where I'd say turning it into a feature instead of a problem would actually be an easy fix and would actually make sense with the rest of her kit. As we've got a little tiny hole there. Yeah, the biggest thing about the Reaper Primer is to remember to spread out the edges before they dry if you're going to use it for filler. Like there, I thinned my primer very, very little, so I was able to just spread out the edge without leaving an edge, a thick rim. And we'll let that dry and see if that does it. So these are good solutions. Also, even if you have see that tiny little bit of mold line that's left, you could use the primer for that too. So a lot of times when you prime, if there's any really fine issues, really fine pitting, you'll notice the primer kind of fills in those problems, right? So this is us just strategically doing that in spots, right, where we would like that effect, but so we don't have to really thickly prime the whole area. And then when we put the primer over the top, it's going to add on to that and really fill up that feature, that imperfection. So here we can see that imperfection is getting filled here. I can still see a little bit that it's a little bit of a divot, but not much. I find the primers thicker, Declearmen. Our gloss, I went thinner with our sealers because with the gloss, sometimes I just want a little bit of gloss, and then if I build it up, it'll get nice and thick and glossy. But I want that, I wanted that kind of versatility to it. I didn't want to have a big, thick, goopy gloss like the micro gloss from Microscale. This stuff, the hobby stuff, this stuff is like big, goopy, like really super glossy, sets up really thick. But it's not good for more like subtle effects, like mixing with metallics as a medium and things like that. I wanted our gloss to be a little more versatile, so we went with more of a gloss that was a little thinner. And because of that, though, it means that maybe it's not quite as good as a gap filler. So I find that our primer is a bit better if you're looking at MSP. If you're looking for this sort of application. So yeah, you can just, when you've thinned it a little bit, you can just pull out the edges to make it blend in. And then you'll be fine. But yeah, I find that the primer, and I really puddled it on there too to try to fill in that bit. So we'll see how that works. I find that the primer is just really good for this. And I'd prime the model anyway, so it's nothing I wouldn't already be doing. So I don't have to worry because I'm like, this is a primer. So when I put a spray primer over the top of this, it's going to be just fine. Or if I decide to use brush on, I'm just using the same stuff. I'm just doing an extra layer or two. I'm actually going to divot out the top of that to make it look more like the notches that are already in her bandana. So just take a knife, make the top a little bit sharper, and it will look like a feature, not a problem. Then we don't even have to fill it in. And we can just do a little bit, this one, same way. It's right up next to the bandana, so just make it a little notch, and you're fine. So yes, even like, like really good miniature painters do that kind of crap. We're just like, are pretty good at assessing when, like, making a mold line a seam is dicey, unless it's perfectly placed. But doing something like that, turning a bubble into just another notch on a bandana that already has notches, that's easy. It's an easy call. Now that one's pretty much filled in at this point. Once I prime it, it's going to totally disappear. And this one, I'm still having, there's just a little bit. See that little divot, that little dot there? So this was a deeper pit, and so it's fighting a little bit more. So I'm going to grab just a little bit. And you may decide at any point, man, green stuff would have been so much easier. But then you'd have to mix up green stuff. And maybe you really didn't want to work with green today. So this just takes a little more, it's a little more patience, I'd say, because drying time. But green stuff requires more ability with green. We're definitely doing green stuff back here, though. When you get to a hole this big, that's when you really need to use a putty of some sort. It's up to you what you use. But like these little guys here, if I wasn't already doing green right there, I'd probably try to do the primer trick here. Because there's like a little pit there, and there's a little pit on the inside. See it, the little speck? But because I'm doing green right here, I'm just probably going to green over this whole area. because it's just, at that point, it's just easy. I'm already going to use green. It's going to be right next to that area, so I'm just going to do it. Just going to look around here a little bit to make sure I'm not missing anything while I'm waiting for those primers to set up. Just a few seconds. That's right. We were going to do her eyebrow. So let's be dangerous. Let's try to use primer to fix this eyebrow. So now, the cool thing about the eyebrows is that they actually have texture. You can see it, right? So this means that I don't really have to smooth in my primer at all. I could just kind of glob it in and kind of keep it in the same kind of pattern as the eyebrow, and it'll be fine. Like, it's not gonna create any more irregularity than the eyebrow already has. Yeah, anybody with like a really good eye would look at that and go, yeah, you know, but it's your model, Crows. If you're just doing it for a game or whatever, or it's just for you and you don't care, do it. I like to take the mold lines in hair. I almost always will do with just the edge of a file. I find that it works actually pretty well if you just go down into the grooves and then just use a knife on the top. If it's really fine hair, then you're maybe a little more dicey, but essentially it's like you've got a choice. You could either, you know, like you say, you can just like work with it and make it paint into something, paint plastic surgery, as we call it. Or you can take advantage of the fact that, hey, here's a chance for me to practice my green work, or here's a chance for practice with this. The more you clean up models, the better you're going to get at it, and the more of a feel you're going to get for what tool is perfect for the job, for each job. So I just needed another little go through with that. I saw the pinprick was filling in, but it didn't fill in completely. And that's typical of primer. If it's a slightly larger pit, you're going to have to put on 2 or 3 coats. But, you know, you're applying it to such a small area. And since I am working with slightly thinned primer at this point, it's drying fast. It's setting up really fast. Meanwhile, the holes up here are completely filled in. And I didn't even have to get out the green. And I'm expecting this eyebrow, I might need one more. Yeah, I'm seeing a tiny, tiny remainder pinprint now. Now do let your previous layer set up before you put another layer on top. When you add a layer of paint to an underlying layer that is not cured, not set, that might have a little bit of wetness still under it, that's when you're begging for the surface to crack. So I'll wait. I'll tap it. I'll decide to go forward. And every time now that I'm doing this, I'm really just adding it to that tiny little pit that I still see. And honestly, with eyebrows, I could probably have just disguised that pit. I could have just used brush strokes, you know, to suggest the brows later on, and we'd be fine. But I decided I wanted to do it. Now, this is setting up actually really well. It's filled in. I gave it extra time because it was so thick. You can see a little bit of a line still, but it actually filled this in pretty well. I'm going to leave it a little bit longer to set because I put on the primer so thick there, I'm pretty sure it hasn't cured yet. Primer definitely has a cure time, and if it's put on in a thin layer, that time is very fast, you know, just 15 minutes, 10 minutes, not even if it's a really, really thin brushed over coat like these in a tiny area. But the thicker you put it on, the more you really do need your primer to set. I usually tell people most primers are fine after half an hour to an hour. If it looks good, chances are, unless you're dealing with an automotive primers typically take longer to cure. But I mean, kind of use your best judgment. I used to just spray stuff and paint, and I honestly can say that using Tamiya, as long as I waited for it to dry, GW, any of those other primers, I never had a problem. But I wasn't using automotive. So I wasn't using like the Rust-Oleum, which probably does have a slightly longer curing time. So it also depends on how thick you're putting your spray primer on and things like that. So this is looking all right. Good. So that's a green stuff spot. I think we managed to tackle everything else without green. Oh yeah, that little big boy right there. I wonder if I can do that. Because this is a rounded area, putting primer on it actually would be wonderful to not have to sculpt that. I'm just going to kind of put a layer of primer here all around. And there's another pit over there. These have to be completely resculpted over here. This one, look how flat it's gotten, because that was obviously a vent for the resin. So that one definitely needs help. Probably actual green stuff. So I'm painting all around here with a very thin layer of primer, and then I'm doubling up kind of and making it thicker where that pit is. And we'll see how that works. While I wait for that to set, I'm actually going to tackle this one a little bit. It's really irregular here. You can see it. I'm going to actually tackle it with the knife first to kind of like carve away any excess. I'm planning to go over it with green anyway, so tackling it and trying to get it into a shape I can work with, because there was a mold line on one edge. It filled in detail here on the edge here. Because it filled in detail here and we lost a bit of this groove, chances are I can reintroduce that groove with a little bit of knife work. Like just kind of slicing and to recreate a groove and then working at it with my knife tip. And then carving it out. You could also just resculpt it with green, depending on what you're feeling and how good you are with green. Although this is an easy resculpt with green, so really, if you're looking for practice, this is a good time to do it. Something simple like this. And I'll probably use green to set up this whole area. I may end up resculpting the entire top of this, like this whole area here. But it's little bits like this where I say, this is good practice with green stuff. Doing little fixes and conversions. That's how you learn to use putty. And if you never do it, you'll never get comfortable with it. But this kind of stuff is really low stakes. Chances are you're going to do it, at least make it look as, you know, you're not going to make it look worse than it already looks. So just going to kind of get my knife tip in here, kind of clear out a bit of this excess resin that's filled it. This is a finer area where my grinder just wouldn't be able to hit this really like narrow part. So that's why we are not using our grinding tool. Every tool has its pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes you just get so good at a particular tool that even though somebody else might think it was a bad choice, you are good enough to make it work. I'm very patient with my knife work because I've used a knife for so many years to do so many things with hobbying. Things that I oughtn't to have done. I should have just taken up files, but I hated files at the time, so I learned how to do a lot of stuff with knife. Just kind of scraping away and burnishing it, burnishing a surface. And I've got a decent groove resculpted here now. Probably still going to take green stuff, but at least I can see it. Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting putties out there to use for this sort of work, and they all have slightly different features. They are all slightly better at one thing or another. So it pays to play around with them. Now, if I am going to resculpt this, kind of want to shave this down. There we go. I've got a pretty good surface there. I can see the groove again. I can see this groove a little bit. I can green stuff that, so. And I think that's good. This could use a little bit more. This will be the last pass with primer, and then I'm going to go get our green. The eyebrows completely filled. No hole, see? This one needs a little bit more. That's setting up very nicely over here. There we are. It's worth mentioning that when you see a primer branded as sandable, which a lot of the Rust-Oleums are, it is going to generally be a thicker primer. It's not going to be a finer primer, because they're essentially, by being sandable, they're essentially saying, well, you can tackle this, you know, and make it smoother. So if it's a little rough or a little thick, you can take it down, right? It's a little better. A little bit more, I think. I think that's going to be just fine to get this area. So smooth that out. So we got rid of a mold line there. That's good. All right, I'm going to go get some green stuff. We just have a little bit of green work to do. We have, I think that button's going to be just fine after another bit of primer. But this needs help and this needs work. So let us get to it with green stuff. I put my green stuff in the fridge, so I'm gonna have to run and get it because it was getting very goopy. Oh, thank you, Carrie. Carrie Michael Cosby with the Prime sub 17 months. Very nicely done. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, let me get my green stuff because I took Julie's advice because, you know, when Bob and Julie give you advice about green stuff, you should listen because they're pros. And I put because my green was getting really goopy and sticking to the plastic, I put it in the fridge to kind of preserve it a little longer. You should usually keep your green stuff in the fridge or freezer anyway. It prolongs the life and keeps that center strip from curing down the middle if you're working with the ribbons. And otherwise, we just keep a couple tubes in the freezer just for when we run out and need a new one. But I'm going to go grab it, and we're going to tackle that, and we're going to tackle resculpting this shoulder area. Alrighty. Hold on for just a second. So remember, green stuff is not non-toxic. Definitely wash your hands before like playing with your pets or eating anything after working with green. So it's nice and cold, and because it's nice and cold, you can see where it's stuck. Let's go back up. But because it's nice and cold, it's going to peel right off of there very nicely. But it's not going to keep doing that, so I need to grab my green stuff and go. I'm going to grab a bit of yellow and about an equivalent part of blue. And remember, if we want it to smooth in, if we're looking to smooth any of these areas, which we are into the bandana, we want slightly more yellow than blue. So I'm going to grab a little bit extra blue. But if it's a little bit toward the yellow side, that's actually ideal. Now this is going to set up and want to stick to everything. There we are. So while it's still cold, so we got kind of like that. I might even want a little more blue. We'll see. Yeah, do not lick the green stuff. Do not allow your animals to lick your hands after working with green stuff. You want it to mix to a nice medium green. The more blue it looks, the higher percentage of blue you've got, the faster it will cure, and the less pliable it's going to be for spreading really thin. Let's see, do I have my taper? Yep. Gotta have the clay shaper. The clay shaper is a necessary part of this balanced hobbying session. Alrighty, so we've got our green all nice and uniform. That nice uniform green, that's what you want to see. And we got our green stuff over here. So I made way too much as usual. Let's grab the glasses. So this sort of thing, this sort of filler bit, this is really good time to use this green stuff for this, because what we need to do is create a skin over the top of these. We're essentially resculpting this, which should be very easy because it's sculpted right under us. So all you do is you put on your blob of green and you start pushing it in these areas, just like the original sculpt. You just want to push it right over the original sculpt, and you want to follow the original sculpt. So really you're just kind of like creating a layer of green over the top of the original. And you want to cover, of course, all the little divots and stuff that you've identified. So I've got that basically set up. I'm going to actually grab a more uniform metal sculpting tool for some of this, just to make sure I'm pressing it down enough. Metal, as I mentioned, is the best tool for kind of scraping it thin over the surface. And the nice thing about doing folds like this is you can take the green like right up to this top edge and just kind of blend it in there. So you don't have to blend it in over a bigger, broader area, which can be more difficult. But over here, on this side, make sure to have some water around. I'm just keeping a little puddle of water right there. That makes it very easy to get it onto my sculpting tool. So if you want to spread this out thin, that's where having a metal tool makes it a bit easier. And I like this, it's kind of my tapered spade is what I tend to call it. This, it isn't a proper triangular spade shape. It's more of a softened one. And I do like this a lot for bigger models when I need to get into these kind of areas, because it is rounded. It's got a slightly rounded surface. So it can be very good for this. If you get excess green, you can just stick it to your existing ball of extra green. Now here, you can see that the green stuff is kind of overlapped, and it's going to keep that scarf from fitting in here really well. So we want to kind of, I've got it pressed in. So if you've got water right here, you can put the water right over the top of the green, and you can take this, kind of slot it in. And the fact that there's water on the green means that it's going to just make an imprint, essentially. It's not going to stick. So you stick that in, make sure that it fits nicely, and you just take it off, and you know that it's going to be fine. You don't have to smooth out that area inside of there as long as this fits great. You just want it to fit well. So you don't have to, like, when the green is going inside of an area, you don't have to smooth it in or anything. You're good. All right, I'm going to take off a little extra water here. I like to use just a Kleenex for that, just very gently touching it to the surface. Since the Kleenex is so absorbent, it gets the water pretty much when you just lightly touch it, so it doesn't stick to the green stuff. You don't want to press it down, you just kind of want to dab it off. And then, Sorry, trying to get a little bit of extra green stuff off of my tool onto the other green stuff. Just wants to fight me today. All right, fine. Be that way. And I'm going to use this spade tool, which is about, as you see, kind of shaped the same as this. So it's a good shape to be using to spread this green out and out and out. And you want to gently push on and spread out your green stuff as it moves away from this area to blend it into the surface. I often mention how I used to make big mistakes doing this because I didn't try to blend it in until the green stuff was already kind of setting up and a little bit older. And when your green stuff is starting to set up, it's developing an outer skin which resists this sort of treatment. It does not want to spread smoothly or thinly. At that point, it wants to just kind of make its little edges and its shape and gets anchored in. So if you want a smooth surface with green, if you want it to blend into surrounding areas, then work it when it's fresh. When you have just mixed it is when it is the most pliable and when you can spread it really thin without it breaking. Once it starts to set up, it's wanting to plasticize. It doesn't want to be thin. It'll try to break or shred when you try to stretch it. And I'm using the silica tool because it's a very, very smooth, because it's silica. Or not silica, it's, oh, you guys know what I mean. Silicone, yeah, it is silicone. Wrong word, Anne. But, so it's nice and smooth and non-stick. And it is a very nice tool for once you've got that green stuff spread out. It's not good for actually spreading the green because the green is resistant enough that it's too soft for that purpose. You have to really bear down on it to spread it. But it's really good for smoothing the surface and making it look nice and smoothing out your edges after you've got the green spread out. So then you can just get this perfect pretty well. Yep. Very fast. Okay, now this is going to be actual sculpting. Let's do it. Grab green stuff. And at this point, by the way, if our primer had not filled in satisfactory on that mold line right there, that really recessed mold line, I could take green stuff and, once that primer is cured, I can just go over the top. All right, so here we need two shapes, right? We need a tiny bit of green that we can make into the top of this button that's been scraped off. And we need a worm of green, a ribbon of green, to go around the outside to create this double layer detail that we've lost. So I'm going to make a nice long worm of green. It's not a disgusting worm. It's like Oscar's friend, Slimy the worm. Wasn't that his name? Man, the things our brain RAM is taken up with still from being kids. Like, we will forget somebody's name that we met 2 seconds ago, but we remember the name of Oscar's pet worm. Like, humans. WTF. So this is way too much green stuff, but I'm still going to put it down. I've got a little bit too much water on my tool there. I'm going to coax this around. This side is perfectly fine, but this whole area isn't. So we'll just kind of double back here and curl that up. Keep extra green stuff around for use. All right. I'm just going to use the silicone tool to just kind of gently pat this down to give us a basis to start from. And this is much higher than the surrounding area, so we'll be slowly pressing it down and blending it in until we can't see that it's any higher. It will stay slightly higher because we didn't excavate any area to do that. So we're going to have to keep this side a little bit higher than the surrounding area in order to get that groove going on. All right, now we're going to go to a... This is where the silica tool... The silicate tool does not work as well, the silicone. when we need to actually press and make edges and differentiate shapes, that's when we need to use a metal sculpting tool. Although I do know people that make the clay shapers work for finer shapes. David's actually one of them. He sculpted roses with one. Tiny little roses. But I think Tiny Spoon would have been easier. And I told him so. And after trying Tiny Spoon, he agreed. Hello, Daffodweir. We have done a lot of prep work today that you have missed. But welcome back. So yeah, if you want to see how we filled in, we used primer to fill in pits and lines, and even a pit in the eyebrow. We're working on these guys and that, and we used our grindy tool, our electric grinding tool, to get rid of mold lines, and now we are resculpting this little shoulder thing because it was really brutalized. So I've got plenty of time with this green stuff. It's not going to start setting up for at least another 20 minutes, especially with how cold it is in this room. Warmer rooms and temperatures mean that green will set up faster. Heat does power the chemical reaction. No, why would it, Pendrake? It's where the hat sits. It seats the hat and gives it something to actually anchor it so it doesn't move. The only reason to fill in that is if you were planning to reposition the hat at a slightly more rakish angle and you didn't want to use the nodule there to anchor it. But I want to use the nodule because I want the hat to be very secure on top of the head. I don't want it to break off easily. So the only reason to do anything is if you were planning not to use the hat. But we were planning to use the hat. I just haven't attached it yet. I don't see the point of fighting around it, doing cleanup. So I'm using the tip and the front edge to kind of make this groove. And it's very messy still, but remember, you've got time. You have time to work this stuff. Don't panic. Just get it kind of roughed in and then just keep working on it. See, I've got kind of that groove roughed in now. Yeah, that's an Izzy design. That off-center design, the asymmetrical design that Izzy likes. It is a fabulous hat. You know who had fabulous hats? It was actually, I kind of lusted after one of them. We went to see My Fair Lady in San Francisco this weekend, and the race course scene. They, of course, had all the women in their fancy race course hats. One of them I adored. Who knows? There's nowhere you could wear things like that nowadays. Not anywhere, except the Renaissance Fair, maybe. But it was out of period for the Renaissance Fair, so but still. I think I would actually have enjoyed the period in time when women wore outlandish hats. Because they just look like fun. You'd hate it. By the end of the day, you'd be willing to, take it off and toss it in a corner, but they look so cool. All right, so now I've flooded this area with water because I've got everything anchored. And I'm just working now on refining the shapes, on creating something similar to this double-tiered shape over here. So I'm going to sculpt it really broad first, and then I'm going to smush it together and try to make it look like it is over there, and I'm going to cut off excess material. You can also wait till it's cured to cut off excess. If it kind of humps up, but you're pretty sure you're good, you can just take a knife at the end and kind of trim it down. Danger there is if you go too far, that you could slice it off entirely and you'd be back at square one. So now I'm smooshing the sides together a little bit, lining up this interior edge so that it really works, and smooshing this outer edge. And if I feel like I need to take a little bit of excess material off, I'll actually kind of take it off the top and smush it down the side. And if all the water makes it kind of just come off, there it is on the end of my tool, then perfect. But I want to smooth this down the side of the existing epaulette anyway. But I've got this wobbly kind of bulgy area here, so I can pat that down. I'm going to push it toward the outside though, kind of so it makes a wobble out. See, it kind of goes out there. Now we will snip it off. And this works pretty well because we've got all this water all over the place. So once it's separated from the main bulk of the sculpt, it doesn't want to adhere again because we've got all this fluid. And I know that I'm probably not going to get perfect because, you know, this is sculpted, machined, 3D stuffed, and I am just a human. But if I can get it close enough, and right now my biggest problem is just the groove down the center here. This is too big a tool. So when I keep trying to firmly establish this groove, I keep spreading out the putty. So what that tells me is it is time to go Werner clock on this and whip out the dull X-Acto knife. It's not, I found it not ideal for Bones USA. Church, and if you're on my Patreon, patreon.com/paintingbig, if you're at the $2 or higher level, I did do a video on this, and I did talk about, it does leave a little bit of texture on Bones USA that you may need to then take off with a file. Because it's just a little rough, and Bones USA is just that little bit soft. I used it, it was okay, but I felt like I had to polish it up a little bit afterwards. So with the knife, I'm going to press this on either side. I'm going to continue to press these lines together. And we're getting a lot closer now, see? I can use just the knife blade now to set in this groove, thus making that groove a lot thinner. So I'm just going to use my knife to nudge that together until it is almost, it's really close now to that side. Now, because this is still relatively fresh, it's very easy to accidentally smoosh it. So once you've got it to where you want it, you probably want to sit back and not touch it for a while. Let it set up and then go back in. And you can refine it once it's set up a little bit. That little bit of green wanted to come off. I'm going to get a sculpting tool that's a little bit softer, less edgy. And if I want to smooth anything, I want to do that before it sets up. Oop. Let's see here. Now let's take this green stuff and smooth it in before it sets up too much. Now that this primer is a little more set, I feel like I can work up here. Spread it out. Can be a little harder here to roll kind of and get this to fit into this area, but it's pretty decent. This is a good opportunity too. Like I said, if this mold line didn't get filled in from the primer, since we're working with green right next to it, this is a good opportunity. Up, and I fingerprinted my other part. This is the danger. When you start working on another part of the project, you can accidentally fingerprint and smoosh your previous work. But luckily, I find, especially when the green's at this stage, it's so easy just to go and correct that. Just be aware of it. So you can get your fingerprints out of there. I think we all do it from time to time. We all accidentally fingerprint stuff. I think Jason, that was Jason Weeby's like comment that he learned 3D. He was so relieved because he didn't have to worry about fat fingering parts of the model that were still wet anymore. Because now he was ZBrush. But yeah, there definitely comes a point where when you've got enough fresh green on a model, you just want to step back and let it set and not work and try to work on other areas. So you may need to spread your green work out over 2 different periods of time. This is why usually people who sculpt in green have more than one model they're working on at the same time, because they have to set aside the one model to cure and then they can pick up another model. So you're usually working on several projects at once. There we are. Better. Boop. And we don't have to worry too much about smoothing this in, of course, because there's a hat on top of it. Ah, nice. There's a Bob and Julie. I knew they were there somewhere. I mean, it's up to you, Turgeon. You saw me using it. It's much easier to get the tip in and just gently like adjust things with the tip of the rotary tool. But yeah, Riffler files too, like Bob and Julie say. I mean, you can do any of that stuff with files. I just find that for a lot of this work now, the the nail grinder is just so useful. Like, it goes much faster. And I can often get a better finish. There we go. I'm going to get this one going on. Smoosh that in. Stay good there. Oh, you're lurking. Ah, fighting with posing a figure. Lurking. I see. Test. Yep, yeah, see, most of that work is going to be hidden under the hat anyway, but it was a good exercise. There. All right, yeah, I'm liking, like, it's a little bit skewed because I blended in. I've got a little bit of blending happening on this side. But this trim actually looks very much like the other trim. I'm going to actually adjust one little part of it with my knife. There. Make it just a little straighter. That's the nice thing about the knife straight blade. Is when I need a straight line, it'll give me automatically a straight line. So you can totally use it that way. Again, you want to make sure, especially when your green is fresher, that you've got a layer of water down there, so your knife doesn't stick to the green and pull it all up when you're trying to do this delicate work. But I think I have pretty much resculpted that there. So now we need the little button. Let us try to do the button without murdering the rest of what we did around it. So I've got a tiny little bead of green. I'm going to put it on top of that flat surface. Boop. It is a little bit big, but this is a big button anyway. Oh, I made the mistake of not getting my tool wet beforehand. There we go. Good, close enough. Let us get spade, soft spade. Give me your soft spade tool. Let's roll that up there. Get some water on our tool. Pat it down a little bit. Uh-oh, get on there. You can do it. Our green is starting to set up a little bit, which means you'll notice at first because it's not sticky. It's not as sticky as it was. So it doesn't want to stick, especially if an area gets wet, which is why you always want to be ready to dry it off if you have to. Add a little water because my green isn't quite as sticky anymore. I got just a little water under it and then it didn't want to stick at all. So I'm actually drying off my tiny bead of green stuff on the paper or on the Kleenex right now to get it to work. You can also roll it around on your finger to get the rest of the water out. And we'll try again. This time we'll try there. Let's try this again, but with a little less water on the tool. Boop. Come on. Oh, it's just very resistant. It's like, nope. You waited too long, woman. We'll give it one more try. Let's sit that for a second. Henry, it's green, yellow epoxy ribbon. Hold on, let me grab my model. It's sculpting putty at Reaper Miniatures. You can also get it just at hardware stores, but it's blue, yellow epoxy ribbon. Also comes in like tubs and stuff. You mix the blue and yellow together and it creates a chemical reaction that cures it so that you can essentially, you can manipulate it and then sculpt it and it will set into that shape. This is what all miniatures used to be sculpted out of. Most people now use digital. Some people, like green users in our chat, that's Bob Rodolfi and Julie Guthrie, they still do their work on miniatures in green stuff. So they're the pros. It is excellent for gap filling and resculpting and fixing areas and conversions. There is a knack to working with it, which is why I do it on this stream every once in a while. I work with green just to show people kind of how to do it. Oh, this may work this time, guys. This may work. Maybe I needed to use the silicone tool in the first place. So I'm trying to resculpt this button. I'm just making this little, I gave it a little hat. And now I'm going to use my clay shaper silicone tool to try to smush it down gently around the button that exists already, kind of the base of the button. This button got flattened because it was used as a vent for the resin, so it lost its domed top. And I am going to attempt to restore its dome, which is going to take some delicate little touch work. But the silicone tool is definitely doing better than the metal. So the nice thing about green is that it does react to pressure, so it does bunch up when you press down around it. So as I do this, it will naturally create a dome shape on top. Yeah, so when a miniatures company, like if you ever take the tour at Reaper, Henry, and they talk about putting greens on mold, that's why original sculptures of miniatures were called greens. It's because they were sculpted out of green stuff. Now they probably call them masters, like resin masters or other masters, unless they are actually greens. So now I did add water to the top. Once I had it tamped down all around, I did add water to the top of the surface so that I could start kind of polishing it, making it blend in a little bit nicer. And as this putty sets up, it does get firmer, and I can essentially burnish it a little bit, like press it gently and kind of just move the tool in circles, and it'll slowly make it smooth. And I'm using the faintest of pressure here. The more pressure you do, the more you're going to deform the putty. There's our nice button. It's coming along. And again, doing these little things, even though these little things may scare you at first, but doing these little things is what gives you a feel for working with green. And doing as many little different things, like setting up a braid line and then, you know, working on a little round button and trying to blend stuff in the cloth up here. All this is great practice because these are very different ways to work with green. So if you did all these techniques on this bust model, it would probably, you know, it would really improve your feel for working with green stuff. You would come out of it probably understanding a little bit more about like how the green works as it cures, what things might be better to do later on. The reason that we waited till the end to do this button is that if I was trying to do this with green that had not set up at all, every little tool mark would show. But as the green sets up and becomes firmer, it's easier for me to get that dome shape and not show any tool marks. Or if I do show any tool marks, it's going to be like very minimal. I can just move my tool around very gently and polish the top. Oh, there's a little bit of a tool mark. Lots of water is really what you want now, because you do not want the tool to catch anywhere. If it catches, it's going to leave a mark. And the best way to keep it from catching on the green is to make sure you have plenty of water. Now that we've got the green firmly stuck down. So next week, gosh, we have 2 days off, remember, for Thanksgiving. American Thanksgiving is Thursday. And so our schedule is going to go a little haywire. But next time we work on this model, I'll actually primer and we'll get to work on actually painting. So there, we've got a nice little button. Now I did mess up a little bit of my braid here, so I'm going to grab my X-Acto knife. Yeah, you didn't realize that, Pendrick? I was going to mention that when you mentioned what a riffle was, or I was going to say it's like rifle, but it's cool. And the only reason I knew that is because I read too many books about the Napoleonic Wars at once upon a time. So rifling. Alrighty. I blame Bernard Cornwell in the Sharps Rifle series for getting me interested in that. So, tip of the knife to just kind of put this little mark in one more time. And you may find it hard to see, especially since you're working. Water can kind of deform the area a little bit visually, and it can be hard to see. Just be patient. You still have a little working time. Things are still soft enough for you to change them and to blend them in. Or to correct, at least to correct an area. There we are. It's not as purely perfectly straight as the other one is. Can still work on that a little bit to get it much nicer. And that's pretty close, guys. I'm going to wait for this to set up, and then chances are I'll have to maybe slice or file down a little bit just to make this smooth out here. But I think we're going to be fine at that point. I just want to wait for this to totally set up now. Going to smooth a little bit that I see rough right there. So again, lots of water on the tool when you want to smooth out an area. Boop. So yeah, that's good. I still need to, this one is filled in entirely, but that one still has a little pinpoint. I have green stuff, so I'm just going to use green to fill in that tiny divot. You can use a tiny, tiny piece of green for this thing. Tiny, tiny. Get up on there. Boop, 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 boop. Get that little green stuff. Tiny little bit of green stuff. You don't have to be perfect on this one because it is so small. But you do want to get your tool with lots of water. Just like before. Just tamp it down. So once I've got the green out and mixed, it is super fast for me to do the green stuff because I've gotten enough experience with it that I can make it work pretty darn fast. Faster than working with primer. But before, when I wasn't sure I was going to be working with green stuff, the primer was fine. I just would have needed another layer. And you know, if I feel like this one's a little rough, I can also grab another tiny little bit of green stuff at this point. Because I've got all this green stuff, I might as well use it. Boop. That one's a little bit maybe too big. I'm going to back out a bit here, guys. Just want to make sure I'm at a good level to focus here. There we go. So let's go there. Perfect. Now closer. Perfect. Uh-oh, I just smooshed an area. 1 second. See, this is the danger. The more you do, I smooshed part of my epaulette, but luckily I noticed so I could correct it. I didn't smoosh my button. And this is a good opportunity to actually take this green off. So yeah, be careful. This is, I'm doing all these things together on stream because this is the time we have to do them. But in reality, when you do this in your own home, when you have time, you should take that time. Yeah, thanks, Quindy. So yeah. All right, so I'm going to finish out these guys. I'm going to fix this, and yeah, we will resume tomorrow with Darius the Blue, everybody. Today we worked a lot on green. We worked on primer to show you how you could fill in very small divots with primer. We've worked on resculpting an epaulette, which I am now re-sculpting because I smooshed bits of it. And yeah, we did a lot with green and stuff to get her ready to paint. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and I will be back tomorrow bright and shiny. And I hope you guys have a great Monday. So thanks everyone for tuning in. All good? You bet. Yes, Rhonda. Rhonda at 3 p.m. Central Time. Definitely show up and give Rhonda some love. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.